When I asked about my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law smiled and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." In that moment, I realized, after 3 years of paying their rent, buying their food, and keeping them afloat, I was not special. I was expendable. I was ironing a pale rose dress when the word special lost its meaning. The dress wasn't fancy, $200 on sale, but the color made my skin look warm, and I thought it would photograph well next to white. I had a little envelope ready with a neat, handwritten card and $1,000 in cash. I wanted to slip it into Evan's hand after the vows, like my mother once did for me. Old-fashioned, personal, a blessing folded into paper. I had barely touched the iron to the sleeve when the phone lit up with Tessa's name. I smiled, ready to hear the venue address. Instead, she said, cool and crisp, "Oh, we already got married yesterday. We only invited special people." For words can be a guillotine. Mine fell in the middle of my kitchen. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the way the iron scorched a soft half-moon into my dress. I remember putting the iron back upright, as if not moving would keep the world from tilting. "Special people," I repeated. "You mean not me?" On the couch I had bought them, mid-gray, stain-resistant, $799. Tessa had once tucked her feet up and called me Mom too. "You're like a second mother," she'd say, always when a bill was due. "Rent. Groceries. Just until we get ahead." I kept them upright for 3 years. $500 a month in rent, $18,000. About $200 in groceries, $7, $200 gifts and emergencies, $8, $200. The car repair, $2,500. The air conditioning fix, $600. Living room set, $1,200. My late husband's careful savings turned into their bridge to nowhere. $33,400, neatly logged in my ledger. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. Evan texted minutes later. "Mom, it was small. Just us and witnesses." Small apparently had room for Tessa's parents, her siblings, champagne flutes, and a live singer. Instagram is merciless with the truth. That night I cried, not from sadness, but from a pressure headache called clarity. Something hard moved into my chest and took a seat like it planned to stay. I slept on top of the covers, my dress laid over a chair like a flag from a country that didn't exist. Morning, coffee silenced the ledger. I opened my checkbook and finally balanced it against my heart. I wasn't grieving a wedding. I was grieving the price tag they hung on me. At 10, the phone rang. "Evan." I let it ring. At 10:10, "Tessa." I let it ring. By 2, I had put on walking shoes and stepped into the neighborhood like a woman who suddenly remembered where she kept her spine. On Maple and 3rd sits Riverbank Credit Union. Through the glass, Mr. Dalton spotted me. He'd watched 3 years of transfers slide out of my account like beads through a rosary. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, ushering me into his office. "Is everything all right?" "Just making a change," I said. "Cancel every automatic transfer to my son's household." "And Mr. Dalton, I'd like to review access controls on all accounts." He didn't blink, bless him. He clicked and typed, the soft machine music of boundaries forming. "All transfers discontinued," he said, turning the monitor so I could see. "No external access on file. Do you want new passwords and challenge questions?" I did. We printed 2 pages. He slid me a pen. It felt like signing my own name for the first time. On my way home, I bought flowers. Not to forgive, just to occupy my hands. Their cars were already in my driveway. My stomach dropped and then steadied. I had given them keys because I thought love meant open doors. But that afternoon, my front door framed a scene like a play. Evan hunched on my couch, Tessa in motion, pacing, and a stranger, Mr. Sloan in a perfect gray suit, thumbing through my papers on the dining table. "What's happening in my home?" My voice sounded taller than me. "Mom," Evan started, and the word cracked like a plate. Tessa put on the soft tone she keeps in a velvet case. "Clara, sweetheart, thank goodness. This is Mr. Sloan. We're worried about you." Mr. Sloan smiled like a notary stamp. "Mrs. Whitfield, your family asked me to review a few things. Just a simple power of attorney to ease the burden. Temporary." He tapped a document. "You've been making unusual choices." "My papers," I said, collecting them under my arm. "That's my unusual choice." He kept the smile. "Your children have the right to intervene if capacity is in question." Tessa added, almost tender, "At your age, confusion happens." The word confusion is a leash when they're trying to walk you. I pointed to the door. "Everyone out." Mom, don't be dramatic, Evan said, palms up, the old little boy plea on a grown man's face. You canceled the transfers. Mr. Dalton told us. Mr. Dalton didn't tell you anything. My voice went low. You asked. Tessa stepped closer, stage whispering. Everything you have will be ours one day. We're just expediting the process. There it was. The unvarnished sentence. Mr. Sloan slid a folder across the table. This language is standard. It lets them manage your bills. Why fight help? I picked up the folder and dropped it straight into the kitchen trash. The thud echoed like a gavel. Out, I said again, steady. Evan, Tessa, out. Mr. Sloan, you can leave the way you entered, without permission. Tessa's eyes flashed. You can't do this to us. We counted on you. You counted wrong. They left with the wounded dignity of people unused to hearing no. At the threshold, Evan turned and issued a son's curse. You'll end up alone. I already am, I said. The difference is, now I chose it. I locked the door. Then I locked it again for the sound of it. Freedom is loud in a quiet room. I didn't sleep much that night. Adrenaline is a drummer. But by dawn I had a list. Attorney. Locks. Cameras. New account. Hair appointment. It was the most selfish list I'd written in 30 years, and it fit perfectly in my palm. Attorney Naomi Harper looked me in the eye the way good doctors do. I explained everything. She listened like a stenographer with a heart. What they did, she said, is textbook, elder financial abuse tactics, escalating to guardianship threats when the money stops. We'll document it all. Cancel access, change your will, add a narrow medical POA to someone you trust who is not financially entangled. And we'll be proactive about restraining orders if they trespass again. I exhaled a lifetime. From there, Patel Hardware. Best locks you've got, I told Arjun, who had met me a dozen times. Always when I was buying something for Evan and Tessa. He didn't comment, just called Liam from the back. Cameras too, he asked. Front, back, driveway, doorbell, interior living areas. Alerts to your phone. Yes, I said. All of it. The phone buzzed, an unknown number, Tessa trying a new mask. Clara, please don't hang up. We made a mistake. Let's do a dinner here, make it special. Like family. Her voice turned honey-thick. Also, the rent is 2 months behind. Just 1,000. Do you miss me, I asked, or my money? A pause. Both, she said, with a kind of brazen honesty. Then my answer is for both. I hung up. I blocked the number. And then, as a ceremonial act of re-entry into my own body, I went and made a hair appointment. When Cynthia at the salon spun the chair around, she grinned. You look lighter, she said. I'm less purchased, I said back. On my way home, a woman sat on my porch steps, hands wrapped around a thermos. Mrs. Whitfield? I'm Ruth Bennett from next door. I heard voices yesterday. Are you okay? In her face I saw something rare, no agenda. I opened the door. Coffee? I asked. I'll trade you for listening. We sat like old friends who had finally met. I told her the whole story. She didn't interrupt. At the end her eyes shone. I did this, she said softly. 5 years ago. With my own daughter. The first months were brutal. Then we learned how to love without invoices. Invoices masquerading as tenderness, paid in full. That evening, Liam screwed a doorbell cam into place and showed me the app. Motion alerts pinged my phone like fireflies. If anyone tries to force entry, he said, dispatch triggers automatically. Even if it's family? I asked, half joking. Especially then, he said. When the last camera blinked to life, I stood in my own living room and listened to the house relearn my silence. My hand brushed the pale rose fabric of the dress still hanging on its hook. I didn't put it back in plastic. I didn't throw it away. I left it there as a museum label, Exhibit A, the day I got my name back. The bell rang the next morning. The doorbell camera pushed a clear image to my phone. A young woman in a navy blazer, badge on a lanyard, folder tucked under her arm. Good morning, Mrs. Clara Whitfield, she said when I opened the door just enough to be polite. I'm Ms. Isabel Alvarez with Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you may be at risk. I need to conduct a wellness check. And there it was, the next move. Of course, I said, heartbeat steady, because I had learned the power of witnesses. Please come in. But first, I'll call my attorney. She'll join us. When you stop being useful, they call you unwell. I was neither. If your helpful loved one ever called you confused, what did you do? Tell me below. And if you need courage, kindly like and subscribe to Here Now. They walked into my house with a lawyer and a smile. They thought I'd sign my freedom away. But I had a pen too, and I used it to draw a line. The morning after I threw Mr. Sloane's folder into the trash, I woke up with the kind of pounding heart that feels like it's trying to write in Morse code on your ribs. I wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement. Maybe both. For years, I had lived like a servant in my own life. My days were dictated by Evan and Tessa's emergencies. Overdue rent, doctor visits, late fees, car repairs. Now I had canceled the transfers, said no for the first time in decades, and thrown their lawyer out of my dining room. But I also knew that people who are desperate for money don't just give up. I poured my coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the pale pink dress still hanging in the corner of the room. It felt like an accusation and a warning all at once. I had spent $200 for a day I wasn't even allowed to attend. I let my gaze move from the dress to my checkbook, then to my new locks still in their packaging, waiting for installation. That's when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Evan and Tessa stood there again, with Mr. Sloane right between them. His gray suit looked sharper in the morning light. He held a folder as if it already belonged to me. "Mom," Evan said, his voice soft, practiced. "We just want to talk." "Clara," Tessa added with her sugar voice. "Please. Yesterday was emotional. Let's be reasonable." Reasonable. That word again. I almost laughed. Reasonable meant, keep paying. Reasonable meant, sign your money away. Mr. Sloane's smile was polite enough to curdle milk. "Mrs. Whitfield, I think yesterday may have been overwhelming for you. All we're asking is that you sign a simple power of attorney. It would only allow your family to help you manage finances. Temporary. Sensible. I didn't step aside. You reviewed my private papers yesterday without my permission. That wasn't sensible. That was trespassing." Evan frowned. "Mom, stop. We're trying to help." "No," I said. "You're trying to help yourselves." Tessa's mask cracked for a moment. "Everything you have will be ours one day anyway. We're just trying to get ahead of the process." That sentence landed like a slap. My own son didn't even flinch when she said it. "Get out," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "All of you. Now." As soon as they left, angry, muttering, threatening, I called the only person I trusted, Attorney Naomi Harper. She picked up on the second ring. "Mrs. Whitfield?" "Naomi, it's Clara. They brought a lawyer to my house. They tried to get me to sign a power of attorney. They're saying I'm confused. They went through my papers." She didn't sound surprised. "You did the right thing not signing. Listen carefully. From now on, everything we do must be documented. Every call, every visit, every text. We're going to build a wall of evidence. They may try to push for guardianship. We'll be ready." "Guardianship?" The word tasted metallic. "Yes," she said calmly. "If they can convince a court you're incompetent, they could get control of your finances. But don't panic. You are competent, and we'll prove it. I'll be there this afternoon with documents to secure your accounts." By noon, Naomi was at my house. She was younger than me by 25 years, but when she walked in with her briefcase, I felt like a child being rescued by her mother. "Let's go see Mr. Dalton," she said. At the bank, Mr. Dalton blinked when he saw us together. "Mrs. Whitfield back again?" "Yes," Naomi said, introducing herself. "We're here to make sure every account has single access only. No shared credentials, no third-party transfers. And we'll open a new account at another bank for her discretionary funds." Mr. Dalton processed everything quickly. "Mrs. Whitfield, I just want to say good for you. I've watched you give and give for years. This is the first time I've seen you keep something for yourself." I nearly cried right there at the counter. A banker who had only ever seen me as a client showed more care than my own son. That evening, as Naomi left, my phone rang again. "Evan." I let it go to voicemail. Then Tessa. I let it ring. Finally, a message. "Mom, this isn't you. You've changed. You're letting strangers get in your head. We just want to make sure you're safe. Please call us back. We're family." Family. That word burned now. Family doesn't bring lawyers to your dining table. Family doesn't tell you you're not special. Naomi had told me to expect retaliation. She was right. 2 days later, I came home from the grocery store to see Evan's car parked outside my house. Tessa was in the passenger seat, arms folded tight. My neighbor, Ruth Bennett, was sweeping her porch across the street. She caught my eye, then walked over. "They've been here for an hour," she whispered. "Did you want me to call anyone?" "Yes," I said. "The police." When the officers arrived, Evan jumped out of the car, hands in the air. "She's our mother. We're just trying to check on her." The officer listened politely, then turned to me. Do you want them trespassed, ma'am? Yes, I said firmly. This is harassment. I don't want them on my property. The officer issued a warning. Evan's face turned red. Tessa's lips curled into a smile that wasn't a smile. You can't keep this up forever, she said as they left. Later, Ruth knocked on my door with a steaming mug in her hand. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said, but my hands were shaking. Clara, she said softly, I've been where you are. My daughter once tried the same tricks. It's hard at first. They'll throw every guilt trip in the book at you. But you're stronger than you think. I set the mug down and took her hand. You don't know how much I needed to hear that. That night, Naomi called again. I filed a cease and desist letter today. From now on, if they want to communicate, they must go through my office. No more ambushes. No more driveway stakeouts. If they violate it, we'll escalate. And if they try to say I'm incompetent, I asked. Then we'll show the judge your bank records, your bills, your medical exams. We'll bring witnesses. You are lucid, organized, and independent. Don't let them scare you. I exhaled into the phone. Naomi, thank you. You don't owe me thanks, she said. You owe yourself freedom. That night, I sat on the couch, my couch, and looked around my quiet house. The locks weren't changed yet. The cameras weren't installed yet. But I already felt safer than I had in years, because for the first time, my boundaries were not imaginary. I thought about the words Tessa had whispered. Everything you have will be ours one day anyway. Not anymore, I thought. Not unless I choose it. If someone ever told you you're confused just because you finally said no, what did you do? Tell me below. And if you want to know how far my own children would go, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. They said I was paranoid for changing locks. But paranoia doesn't come with receipts, betrayal does. The morning after the police gave Evan and Tessa a trespass warning, I woke up to a silence that felt almost too still. Not comforting silence, tense silence, like the air itself was listening. I shuffled into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat with my planner. The old Clara would have been writing grocery lists for them, calculating which bill of theirs was due, which check needed mailing. But the new Clara wrote one simple word at the top of the page, me. And under it, my list. Change locks. Install cameras. Hair appointment. Call June. Walk without purpose. It looked strange to see a list with no one else's name on it. Strange and beautiful. At 10, I drove to Patel Hardware. Arjun, the owner, knew me by sight. I'd been in there 100 times over the years. For Evan and Tessa's apartment fixes, their leaky faucet, their oven knob, their air conditioner. Mrs. Whitfield, he said warmly. What's broken this time? Nothing, I said, surprising myself. This time it's for me. I need the best locks you carry. And I want a full set, front, back, side door. Arjun raised his eyebrows but didn't ask questions. Best locks? That's the grade 1 deadbolt set. Solid steel. Pick resistant. I'll take them, I said. And I need them installed right away. Just then, his son Liam walked in, tall, wiry, carrying a box of cameras. Arjun grinned. Perfect timing. This is my boy. He does security installs. Cameras, alarms, you name it. Liam set the box down. For your place? Yes, I said. Full coverage. I want to see every angle. Inside, outside, driveway, porch. Alerts to my phone. He nodded, businesslike. We can set it up tomorrow morning. It'll take half a day. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that had nothing to do with Evan or Tessa. I felt secure. That afternoon, I went to the salon I hadn't visited in over a year. Clara, Cynthia, my stylist, cried. We thought you'd forgotten us. I didn't forget, I said, easing into the chair. I just forgot myself. She snipped and brushed, her scissors sounding like little wings. So what's the occasion? Freedom, I answered. She laughed, thinking I was joking. But when she spun me around at the end, my reflection startled me. My hair shone. My eyes looked brighter, harder. You look like you've dropped 10 pounds of worry, Cynthia said. I did, I said softly. I just didn't know it was all in my face. Back home, I picked up the phone and called my sister June in Chicago. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and surprised. Clara, my goodness. I thought you'd forgotten me. I'm sorry, June, I said. I've been lost. I told her everything. The secret wedding, the special people comment, the trespassing, the lawyer, the money. All of it spilled out like water from a burst pipe. When I was done, June was quiet. Then she said, Clara, it was about time. About time for what? For you to wake up, she said gently. Every time we talked, you bragged about how much money you gave Evan and Tessa, like that was proof they loved you. But Clara, they never did. Not the way you thought. Her words stung. I saw Evan at a reunion 2 years ago, June continued. Do you know what he said when people asked about you? He didn't say, Mom's doing great, or, I miss her. He said, Mom helped us with rent again. Mom bought us new furniture. It was always about the money. Never about you. I closed my eyes. A sister's honesty cuts deep, but it also cleans. And Tessa, June added, her voice colder now, always spoke in the future tense. When Clara's gone, we'll remodel her house. When we inherit, we'll invest in a business. As if you were already gone. My throat closed. Clara, June said softly, they don't love you. They love your wallet. That evening, I put on walking shoes and stepped outside. For once, I didn't have a destination. I walked past the park where I used to take Evan when he was little. I remembered the boy who called me the best mom in the world. And I whispered out loud, where did you go? Maybe he had been swallowed by Tessa's hunger. Or maybe I had trained him to see me as a wallet by never saying no. Either way, the boy was gone. And I had to stop mourning him, or I'd never survive the man he became. When I got back, Ruth Bennett was waiting on her porch. She waved me over. Come sit, she said. Her rocking chair creaked as she poured me iced tea. I heard voices the other night. Sounded heated. I told her everything. She listened without flinching. I went through this too, she said finally. My daughter. Different faces, same tricks. They learn the script somewhere. Make her feel indispensable, invent emergencies, and when she resists, question her mental health. I laughed bitterly. You think there's a handbook? Not officially, Ruth said. But they all read from it. We laughed together, but it was the kind of laugh that stings on the way out. The next night, I sat in my living room with the lights low. Outside, a car idled in front of my house for 15 minutes. I knew that shape. Evan's car. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They just sat there, watching. The hairs on my arms rose. I picked up my pen and logged it. Date, time, license plate. Naomi had told me to keep a log. Evidence is stronger than feelings. Still, when they finally drove away, I felt like prey. The following morning, Liam came with the locks and cameras. He installed the deadbolts first, then the cameras. Front door, back door, driveway, porch, kitchen, living room, he explained. Everything feeds to your phone app. If anyone moves, you'll get an alert. If anyone forces entry, police are notified automatically. I nodded, my hands trembling with relief. Even if it's family? Especially then, Liam said with a small smile. When the last camera blinked on, I exhaled. My house had finally chosen sides, mine. 2 days later, the mailman knocked with a certified envelope. The return address was a law firm. Inside, petition for guardianship. Hearing date, 3 weeks from today. My knees almost buckled. I sat down hard on the couch. They weren't done. They were escalating. They wanted the law to declare me incompetent, to hand my life and my money into Evan's hands. I called Naomi immediately. My voice shook. It's happening. They filed. I expected this, she said calmly. Don't panic. We'll prepare. You'll have a capacity evaluation. We'll gather witnesses. We'll build a defense so strong it won't matter how many lies they tell. I closed my eyes. Naomi, what if the court believes them? Then we fight harder, she said. You're not alone, Clara. You're not alone. When my children couldn't buy my obedience, they tried to buy a verdict. They called it concern. I called it what it was, control. I left the certified petition letter sitting on the dining table for hours. It glared at me, daring me to touch it again. I'd already read the words, petition for guardianship. Hearing set for 3 weeks. In black and white, my son and his wife were asking a court to take away my right to manage my own life. I thought about the money, $33,400 drained in 3 years. But the petition wasn't about money anymore. It was about power. If they won, they'd have the keys to every penny I owned. They could sell my house, access my accounts, even decide where I lived. That wasn't just theft. It was erasure. I called Attorney Harper. My voice trembled. Naomi, it's happening. They filed the petition. I expected this, Clara, she said, steady as always. Don't panic. This is a scare tactic. We're going to respond with strength. Step 1, a full capacity evaluation by an independent doctor. Step 2, witness statements from people who see you daily. Step 3, documentation. Every receipt, every bill, every note from your bank. We will show the court you are competent. And we'll show them Evan and Tessa's motive, money. Her calm was contagious. By the end of the call, my hands had stopped shaking. 2 mornings later, my doorbell rang. My phone app lit up with a crisp video from the new camera. A young woman stood on my porch in a navy blazer, badge hanging from a lanyard, folder tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," she said when I cracked the door. "I'm Ms. Isabel Alvarez from Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you may be at risk. I need to conduct a wellness check." My stomach dropped. Of course. Evan and Tessa had reported me. "Can I see your ID?" I asked. She showed me her badge. It looked real. "Please come in," I said, then added. "But I'd like to call my attorney first. She'll be here shortly." Ms. Alvarez sat politely in my living room, folder open on her lap. "We received concerns that you've made abrupt financial changes, installed unnecessary security systems, and cut off contact with your family. We were told you may be experiencing confusion or paranoia." Her words were clinical, but the subtext was sharp. "Your children say you've lost your mind." I smiled tightly. "Is it paranoia to change your locks after your son enters your house with a lawyer uninvited? Is it confusion to install cameras after being harassed in your driveway? Or is it just common sense?" Before she could answer, Naomi walked in, crisp suit, briefcase in hand. She shook Ms. Alvarez's hand and sat down next to me. "My client is competent and has legal representation," Naomi said. "We'd like to review the concerns on record." Naomi laid out documents like a magician spreading cards. My balance bank statements. Copies of the automatic transfers I had canceled. Receipts from Patel Hardware for locks and cameras. The salon bill from Cynthia. A letter from Mr. Dalton confirming my accounts were in order. "This is not confusion," Naomi said. "This is financial independence." Ms. Alvarez looked through the papers, her expression softening. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you manage your own bills?" "Yes," I said. "I pay them on time. Always have. I can show you my tax returns, too." "Do you cook and care for yourself?" I gestured to the clean kitchen. "Every day." "Do you take any medication?" "Just vitamins and aspirin." Naomi added. "My client also maintains healthy social relationships. Her neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, is here daily. She attends her salon. She runs errands independently. These are not signs of decline." Ms. Alvarez closed her folder. Her tone had shifted. "Mrs. Whitfield, I see no evidence that you are at risk. Quite the opposite. It appears you're protecting yourself from exploitation. I'll close this case as unfounded." Relief washed over me like a warm tide. "Thank you," I said softly. Naomi's voice was firm. "And please note, any further malicious reports from her family will be documented as harassment. We will not tolerate repeated weaponization of your office." Ms. Alvarez nodded. "Understood." When she left, Naomi turned to me. "That's round 1. They tried to use the state against you. It didn't work. But they'll try something else. Be ready." That evening, Ruth knocked with a casserole dish in her hands. "You've had a day," she said, setting it on the counter. I told her about the wellness check. She shook her head. "Classic move. They call concern when what they want is control. Happened to me too. My daughter once told the church pastor I was losing it because I forgot her rent money 1 month. He came over to pray for my clarity. We both laughed, but it wasn't funny. "Ruth," I said, "how did you survive it?" "I stopped trying to prove myself to people who wanted me weak," she said. "And I built a circle of people who wanted me strong." The next morning, as I watered the flowers by my porch, my grumpy neighbor Mr. Pickett called across the street. "Mrs. Whitfield, all these cameras you've got now looks paranoid, if you ask me. And those strangers visiting all the time. People are talking." I froze. "Strangers? Those women," he said, waving dismissively. "Your new friends. And that lawyer, in and out. Looks like confusion to me." My heart sank. He was going to be their witness. I forced a smile. "Mr. Pickett, what you call paranoia, I call protection. And those strangers are friends. Maybe you should try it sometime." He harumphed and turned away. Naomi was right. They weren't just filing paperwork. They were recruiting voices. That afternoon, Naomi called. "Clara, I've scheduled your independent capacity evaluation with Dr. Lena Moore. She's one of the best. You'll meet her next week. Don't be nervous. Just be yourself." "Naomi, what if I stumble? What if I forget something simple?" "Clara, everyone forgets. What matters is the whole picture. your reasoning, your consistency, your independence. You'll be fine. I hung up, both reassured and terrified. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Evan's face floated in my mind. Not the man who scowled in my driveway, but the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap. How had we gotten here? Then I remembered June's words. They never loved you the way you thought. They loved what you gave them. And I realized, maybe I hadn't lost my son. Maybe I had only lost my illusion of him. When love isn't real, lies are. My children didn't just twist my story. They wrote a brand new one, in ink they thought would last. The petition was filed, the wellness check closed. I thought maybe, just maybe, Evan and Tessa would cool down. I was wrong. One morning, Naomi called. Clara, I just received discovery documents from their attorney. I need you to come to my office. My stomach sank. Discovery meant evidence. What evidence could they possibly have? At her office, Naomi handed me a thick folder. This, she said grimly, is what they're submitting to the court. I opened it, and the breath went out of me. Inside were statements, screenshots, and sworn affidavits. On paper, I looked like a woman unraveling. The first affidavit was from Mr. Pickett, my across-the-street neighbor. He wrote, Mrs. Whitfield has been acting erratically. She installed multiple cameras around her property, as if she believes she is under constant threat. She frequently hosts strangers at her home, and I have heard her shouting at her family in the street. In my opinion, she is showing signs of paranoia and confusion. I wanted to scream. He had twisted everything. The cameras were protection. The strangers were Ruth and her friends. The shouting? Defending myself from trespass. But on paper, stripped of context, it read like madness. The second affidavit made my blood run cold. It was signed by Mr. Daniel Cho, my pharmacist. Mrs. Whitfield has irregular prescription purchases. She does not appear to refill necessary medications and may be hoarding or neglecting treatment. I am concerned for her well-being. I slammed the folder shut. That's a lie. Naomi nodded. I know, but the court doesn't. We need to confront him. Then came 3 letters from supposed family friends. I didn't recognize 2 of the names. The third was an old acquaintance of Tessa's. They wrote the same script. Clara has changed since meeting new neighbors. She has become hostile and isolated. We are worried she is being manipulated. It was all coordinated. Lies stitched together into a quilt meant to cover the truth. That evening, I told Ruth everything. She shook her head, furious. They're building a case out of smoke, she said. But smoke can choke if no one clears the air. We'll testify. Cynthia will. Arjun will. Liam will. Mr. Dalton will. We'll drown their lies with truth. Her certainty steadied me. The next morning, Naomi and I drove to the pharmacy. Mr. Cho looked startled when we approached. Mrs. Whitfield, he said nervously. Good to see you. Is it? I asked, holding up the affidavit. Because this says you think I'm neglecting medication. His face flushed red. Oh my goodness. No, your daughter-in-law came in. She said she was worried about you. She asked if you took medication regularly. I told her you only buy vitamins and aspirin. She pushed me to sign a paper confirming that. I thought it was for insurance. I didn't realize. You didn't realize you were helping her declare me incompetent? My voice cracked. Naomi stepped in. Mr. Cho, we need you to write a sworn statement clarifying what happened. That you never said she was neglecting treatment. That you were misled about the purpose. He nodded rapidly. Of course. I'll do it today. Naomi tried to speak with Mr. Pickett, but he wouldn't budge. I know what I saw, he said stubbornly. She's paranoid. All those cameras. All those women coming by. Doesn't look right to me. Naomi pressed him. Did you ever actually speak to her about these concerns? No, he admitted. Didn't need to. Actions speak louder. Naomi sighed as we walked away. Unreliable witness, but still a witness. We'll challenge his credibility. That afternoon, Naomi called. Clara, your evaluation with Dr. Moore is confirmed for next week. She'll test memory, reasoning, and daily functioning. This is standard. Don't worry. Just be yourself. Naomi, I said, what if I stumble? What if they take one mistake and turn it into proof? Then we show the whole picture, she said firmly. Your clarity, your independence, your strength. You're not fighting alone. Meanwhile, Ruth rallied the troops. Cynthia from the salon wrote a statement about my clarity and our conversations. Arjun and Liam detailed my purchase of locks and cameras, framing them as rational self-protection. Mr. Dalton drafted a letter about my financial responsibility. Even June in Chicago offered to testify by video, recalling years of conversations where Evan and Tessa reduced me to a bank account. I cried when I read them. Not tears of despair this time, but tears of gratitude. One afternoon, I drove to the cemetery. Robert's grave looked peaceful, a little overgrown. I sat on the grass and spoke out loud. Robert, I wish you were here. I thought I was protecting Evan by giving him everything. But I see now I was crippling him. And now he wants to cripple me. But I won't let him. Not with your savings. Not with my life. The wind stirred, soft and gentle, as if he approved. The night before the evaluation, I sat at the dining table with my ledger open. I looked at the neat columns of expenses, the math precise, every transfer documented. If this was confusion, then confusion had perfect handwriting. I whispered to myself, you are clear. You are competent. You are free. They thought a test would expose my weakness. Instead, it revealed my strength. My mind wasn't slipping, it was sharpening. I woke up before dawn. My house was still, my heart restless. The appointment with Dr. Lena Moore, the neuropsychologist, was at 10. I brewed coffee, but my hands trembled so badly I spilled the first cup. For 3 weeks, Evan and Tessa had painted me as unstable, paranoid, incompetent. Today was my chance to prove them wrong. And yet, the weight of it terrified me. What if I stumbled? What if I forgot a detail? What if my tongue tied itself in fear and they took it as proof of decline? I stared into the mirror in my bathroom. My reflection looked back, tired eyes rimmed red but steady. You are clear, I whispered to myself. You are capable. You are not theirs to define. Naomi drove me to the clinic. Dr. Lena Moore greeted me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind sharp glasses. Mrs. Whitfield, she said warmly, thank you for coming. This is just a conversation and a few exercises. Take your time. There are no tricks here. Her tone was gentle, but I knew the stakes were high. We sat in a small, sunlit office. A plant thrived in the corner. On the desk, a stack of papers, a stopwatch, and a recorder. Let's start simple, Dr. Moore said. What's today's date? I answered. What day of the week is it? What season? Who is the current president? Easy. My voice steadied. Now, tell me what you did yesterday, from morning to evening. I told her, made breakfast, called June, watered the flowers, wrote in my journal. Clear and specific. She nodded, scribbling notes. She read me a list of 10 words. Apple, table, penny, river, cloud, chair, book, candle, shoe, car. Repeat them back to me. I did. She asked me to remember them for later. Then puzzles. Patterns on paper, simple math, word associations. Subtract 7 from 100. Keep going. My brain stretched, but it worked. After an hour, she asked me to recall the words. I remembered 9 out of 10. She smiled. Better than most of my 40-year-olds. She asked about my finances. How do you handle your bills? I pay them myself, I said, pulling out my ledger. Neat rows of numbers, every expense balanced. Her eyebrows rose. This is meticulous. Organized. Numbers don't lie, I said. People do. Then she asked about my family. I told her everything. Evan, Tessa, the money, the betrayal, the lies. Her face stayed professional, but her eyes softened. After 2 hours, she closed her folder. Mrs. Whitfield, I'll be blunt. You are fully competent. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning intact, your financial judgment excellent. There are no signs of cognitive decline. Relief flooded me so suddenly I almost cried. Thank you, I whispered. This evaluation isn't just for the court, she said kindly. It's also for you. To know in writing that the truth is on your side. That evening, Ruth invited me over. She'd gathered Cynthia from the salon, Arjun and Liam from the hardware store, and 2 of her garden club friends. They welcomed me like a sister. We've all been through something like this, Cynthia said. A daughter who only visits when she needs money. A nephew who suddenly cares about wills. A grandson who calls every week, for loans, not love. We sat around Ruth's kitchen table, trading stories. Painful, but also healing. You're not alone, Clara, Ruth said. You have us. We'll testify. We'll stand with you. For the first time in months, I felt wrapped not in manipulation, but in genuine care. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I knew I'd never send. Dear Evan, I remember the boy who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. I remember the way you clung to me at your father's funeral. I raised you alone, with every ounce of strength I had. I thought giving you everything would make you strong. Instead, it made you dependent. And now you're trying to take the last thing I have, my independence. I love you, but I will not let you do this to me. Not to me. Not to the woman who gave you life. I folded it carefully and tucked it in my drawer. It wasn't for him. It was for me. The next day, Naomi came by. She reviewed Dr. Moore's evaluation and the witness statements. This is airtight, she said. Their case relies on bias, hearsay, and lies. Ours relies on documentation, professionals, and community. Judges respect facts. And we have them. Her confidence steadied me. But later that night, grief crept in. I sat on my bed, clutching a photo of Evan as a child. His gap-toothed grin. His small arms around my neck. I wept. Not for the money. Not for the lies. But for the boy I thought I had, the boy who no longer existed. Maybe he never did. Maybe I had blinded myself with love, so desperate to keep him close that I bought his affection. But now the truth stood naked. I had lost a son long ago, and in his place grew a man who saw me only as an ATM with a pulse. The grief was sharp, but beneath it clarity hummed. I wasn't just defending my money in court. I was defending my dignity, my freedom, my life. What would you say in a letter you'll never send? Share your thoughts below. And don't miss part. Their day in court, where my son and his wife take the stand, and their lies meet the truth. Subscribe now, the showdown is coming. My son swore to tell the truth. But every word he spoke in court was a knife, sharpened on the lies of the woman he chose over his own mother. The morning of the hearing, Naomi picked me up early. I wore my best black suit, pressed the night before, and a silver brooch Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. This isn't just about your money, Naomi reminded me as we walked into the courthouse. It's about your right to be Clara Whitfield, whole and free. Keep your head high. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper. People shuffled past in hushed voices. My heart thudded with every step. In the hallway, I saw them. Evan in a brand new suit that didn't fit quite right. Tessa in black, as if attending a funeral, maybe the funeral of our relationship. Their lawyer, Mr. Armitage, was tall, silver-haired, exuding the smug confidence of someone who thought the case was already won. When Evan's eyes flicked toward me, he looked away quickly. But Tessa's gaze locked with mine, hard and cold, like she'd already buried me. The judge, Honorable Miriam Clark, entered, a woman with firm posture, no-nonsense eyes. Mr. Armitage began. Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Clara Whitfield, 71 years old, has shown signs of serious mental decline. Her abrupt financial changes, her paranoia, her isolation from her family, all point to cognitive impairment. My clients, Evan and Tessa Whitfield, seek guardianship not for themselves, but to ensure Clara's safety. His words were coated in sugar, but I tasted poison. Naomi rose next. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Whitfield is not only competent, but exceptionally so. What she has experienced is not decline, but exploitation. For years, she supported her son and daughter-in-law financially. When she stopped, they retaliated. This petition is not about protection. It is about greed. Judge Clark nodded, expression unreadable. Tessa was the first witness. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, then began to cry almost instantly. Clara has always been like a second mother to me, she said, voice trembling. But recently, she's become paranoid. She accused us of using her, when all we wanted was to love her. She cut us off without explanation, installed cameras, and refused to take our calls. We're terrified she's being manipulated by outsiders. Her performance was flawless. Even I almost believed her. Naomi stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Whitfield, Naomi said, when was the last time you called Clara without asking her for money? Tessa blinked. We talked all the time. About many things. A specific date, please. Silence. Isn't it true, Naomi pressed, that when Clara asked about attending your wedding, you told her you had only invited special people? Tessa's face flushed. That was taken out of context. What context makes those words acceptable? No answer. The courtroom was quiet except for the scratch of the judge's pen. Then it was Evan's turn. My son. My boy. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, his jaw tight. My mother has always been generous, he began. But lately she's been irrational. She refuses to help us, even though she knows we rely on her. She yells, isolates herself, and makes impulsive decisions. We fear she's not capable of managing her finances anymore. Hearing his words felt like watching him set fire to my love, piece by piece. Naomi's cross-examination cut through the smoke. Mr. Whitfield, how much money has your mother given you in the last 3 years? I don't know the exact amount. Would $33,400 sound accurate? He shifted uncomfortably. Maybe. And how many times have you visited your mother without asking for money? Silence. His lips tightened. Is it true, Naomi continued, that you and your wife entered your mother's house without her permission, bringing a lawyer, to pressure her into signing a power of attorney? He swallowed hard. We were worried about her. Worried enough to go through her private documents without consent. He didn't answer. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Then came Mr. Pickett, grumbling about my cameras and strangers. Naomi sliced through him, too. Mr. Pickett, did you ever speak to Mrs. Whitfield directly about your concerns? No. So your testimony is based only on what you saw from across the street? Yes. And you admit you don't actually know who her visitors were? Yes. Naomi turned to the judge. No further questions. Finally, Dr. Lehman, the psychiatrist Evan and Tessa had hired. He testified that my refusal to undergo an earlier evaluation suggested paranoia. Naomi countered by submitting Dr. Moore's full evaluation. Objective, thorough, glowing. Dr. Lehman looked like a man whose script had just been torn apart. As they testified, I sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly in my lap. My heart hurt, but my mind stayed clear. I wanted to shout, to stand, to cry out. That's not true. That's not who I am. But Naomi had told me. Silence is your weapon until it's your turn. Let them dig their own holes. So I stayed silent, and I let them dig. Each time Evan or Tessa faltered, I saw Judge Clark's pen pause. Her eyes flicked up, sharp, measuring. I couldn't read her mind, but I knew she was no fool. This wasn't a funeral after all. It was a reckoning. They tried to silence me with affidavits and false witnesses. But when it was finally my turn to speak, the courtroom didn't just hear my voice, it felt it. Judge Clark glanced down at her notes, then looked toward me. Mrs. Whitfield, please take the stand. My heart thundered. My legs felt heavier than they ever had. Naomi squeezed my hand. This is your moment. Speak clearly. Speak truth. Nothing else matters. I stood, walked slowly to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. For 71 years, I had been many things: wife, mother, provider, widow. Now I was something else entirely, a woman defending her own existence. Naomi rose and smiled reassuringly. Mrs. Whitfield, let's start simply. Can you tell the court who you are? My name is Clara Whitfield, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm 71 years old. I live alone in the house I've owned for 40 years. I pay my bills on time, I cook my meals, I manage my accounts, and until recently, I supported my son and his wife financially. Naomi nodded. How much financial support did you provide? In 3 years, $33,400, I said firmly. Rent, food, furniture, emergencies, gifts. All documented. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Why did you stop? Naomi asked. I took a deep breath. Because I realized what I was giving wasn't love. It was money. And they didn't see me as a mother anymore, only as a bank account. When they excluded me from their wedding, telling me they only invited special people, I understood exactly where I stood. I was good enough to pay, but not good enough to belong. Naomi's voice softened. How did that make you feel, Mrs. Whitfield? I looked at the judge, then down at my hands. Like a fool. Like I had spent years trying to buy my own child's love. And in return, I was treated as disposable. That pain is why I finally said no. Not confusion. Not paranoia. Clarity. Judge Clark's eyes met mine. For the first time, I thought I saw sympathy flicker there. Naomi laid out my ledger, neat rows of handwriting, every transfer accounted for. Do you recognize this, Mrs. Whitfield? Yes. It's my record book. Every dollar I gave them is written there. I balanced these numbers myself. Naomi passed it to the judge. Would an incompetent woman keep financial records like this? The opposing lawyer objected. Argumentative. Withdrawn, Naomi said smoothly, but the damage was done. The image of my precise handwriting lingered in the judge's mind. Then Mr. Armitage stood. His voice was smooth, practiced. Mrs. Whitfield, isn't it true you've cut off your only child? That you've isolated yourself from family? I cut off money, I corrected. Not love. But they made it clear love was never part of the bargain. You admit you've installed cameras, changed locks, and blocked phone calls. Wouldn't you call that paranoid behavior? No. I call it protection. They broke into my house with a lawyer. They tried to make me sign away my rights. Any sane person would protect themselves after that. He frowned. Do you deny shouting at your son in the street? I shouted, yes. When someone threatens your freedom, your voice rises. That's not confusion. That's survival. His jaw tightened. Mrs. Whitfield, don't you think it's possible you're being manipulated by your neighbors and your lawyer, people who benefit from keeping you away from your family? I leaned forward. Mr. Armitage, for 3 years, not one of those people asked me for a dime. But Evan and Tessa asked for everything. Tell me who benefits more, the ones who stand by me or the ones who drain me. The courtroom went silent. Judge Clark cleared her throat. Answer noted. Naomi stood for redirect. Mrs. Whitfield, if the court grants your son guardianship, what will happen to you? I swallowed. I will lose everything. My savings. My independence. My freedom. They will sell my home, control my life, and erase my choices. I will become a prisoner in the name of love. I paused, then lifted my chin. But I am not incompetent. I am not confused. I am 71 years old, and I am clear. Clearer than I have been in years. And I deserve the right to live the rest of my life on my own terms. The weight of the words hung in the air. When Naomi nodded that she was finished, I stepped down from the stand. My legs trembled, but my back stayed straight. In that moment, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman who had finally spoken her truth in the place it mattered most. As I sat, I caught Evan staring at me, his face unreadable. Was it anger? Regret? Shame? I couldn't tell. Tessa's lips were pressed tight, fury flashing in her eyes. Their lawyer scribbled furiously, but I could sense it. Their case was cracking. And all I had done was tell the truth. When the judge finally spoke, every second felt like a lifetime. Would I walk out free, or shackled by the people I once called my family? The courtroom air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The testimony was over. The lies, the truths, the affidavits, the tears, all of it had been laid bare. Judge Clark disappeared into chambers to deliberate. 20 minutes. 40. An hour. Each tick of the clock was a drumbeat in my chest. Evan and Tessa sat across the aisle, whispering to their lawyer, their faces tight with strain. Every so often, Tessa glanced at me, her expression somewhere between hatred and panic. Naomi sat beside me, calm as ever. Remember, Clara, the burden of proof is theirs. They had to show you're incompetent. They didn't. We showed you're strong. I nodded, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Finally, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Clark entered, robe flowing, her expression unreadable. I gripped the edge of the table as she adjusted her glasses, shuffled her papers, and began. This court has carefully reviewed the petition filed by Evan and Tessa Whitfield, seeking guardianship over Mrs. Clara Whitfield, age 71. Her voice was calm, measured. My heart pounded harder. The petitioners allege that Mrs. Whitfield has demonstrated confusion, paranoia, and financial mismanagement. However, she paused. My breath caught. The evidence presented does not support these allegations. Judge Clark continued, her tone firm. On the contrary, Mrs. Whitfield has demonstrated clear mental acuity. Her financial records are precise. Her independent evaluation shows no signs of cognitive decline. Witnesses testified credibly to her competence. Meanwhile, the court has serious concerns regarding the petitioner's motives. Their testimony revealed significant financial dependence on Mrs. Whitfield. The evidence suggests this petition stems from financial frustration rather than genuine concern. Evan's shoulders slumped. Tessa's lips parted in shock. Therefore, Judge Clark said, her voice ringing clear, the petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Whitfield remains the sole authority over her person and estate. Furthermore, the court warns the petitioners that continued harassment or exploitation may result in legal consequences, including charges of elder financial abuse. The gavel struck. Just like that, it was over. Naomi squeezed my hand. You did it, Clara. You're free. Across the aisle, Tessa hissed something to Evan. He refused to meet my eyes. As they stormed out, Tessa shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. But beneath it, I saw fear. Fear of losing control. Evan lingered a moment longer, glancing back at me. For the briefest second, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. But it was too little, too late. I turned away. When we stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't a headline story. But for me, it was the story of my life. I looked at the sky, blue and endless. For the first time in years, I felt just as endless. That evening, Ruth hosted a dinner at her house. The kitchen was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted chicken. Cynthia brought wine, Arjun brought bread, Liam set up music. "We should toast," Ruth said, raising her glass. "To Clara, for proving that truth is stronger than greed." We all clinked glasses. I smiled through tears. "To freedom," I whispered. Later, alone at home, I sat at my dining table. The same table where I had once counted pennies for Evan and Tessa. I opened my drawer and pulled out the unsent letter I had written to Evan. I read it one last time. Then I tore it into pieces. Not out of anger, but release. I no longer needed him to hear my words. I had spoken them where it mattered most, in court, in truth, in freedom. In the weeks that followed, I changed more than just my locks. I sold the house where I had carried both joy and betrayal. I moved into a sunny apartment downtown, close to the library and the park. I donated half my savings to charities that protect elders from financial abuse. With the other half, I began living. I took art classes. I traveled to Italy, a dream Robert and I once shared. I filled my days with friendships, with laughter, with color. And not once, did I answer a call from Evan or Tessa again. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Evan will ever wake up from the life he's built with Tessa. If he'll ever see me as more than a bank account. But then I remind myself, that's not my responsibility anymore. My responsibility is me. What would you do if your own family tried to take your freedom through the courts? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if Clara's story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every voice deserves to be heard, and every life deserves freedom.